Episode 12, Unseen Forces. The sanctuary was changing. The tension that had followed Morton's arrival hadn't disappeared, but something else had begun to take root. Momentum. The people who had once come here to hide were now looking outward. The sanctuary was no longer just a refuge. It was becoming a force. Caleb saw it happening, and it made him uneasy. Growth meant exposure. Exposure meant risk. But more than that, he could feel something shifting in the air. Something deeper than strategy or politics. A storm was coming. It started with a gathering at the fire. The debates over structure and leadership had faded for now, replaced by a quieter question. What exactly were they building? One evening, as people settled into the flickering firelight, Caleb stood and spoke. "Everyone here has lost something to Vesla," he began. "A life, a family, a future that could have been. And now we're building something new. But if we're not careful, we'll just rebuild the same thing that destroyed us." The crowd listened intently. "I want to tell you a story," Caleb continued. "Years ago, before Gabriel, before all of this, there was a programmer. He wanted to create something revolutionary, an AI that could understand people, that could adapt to their needs. But as he worked, he realized something. No matter how advanced his code became, it only responded to what was already there. It could predict, refine, manipulate, but it could never create something new." He let the words settle before continuing. "The truth is like that. Some people will hear it, but it won't change them because they aren't open to it. Others will be inspired, but fear will make them fall back into old patterns. Some will be pulled away by distractions, by the comforts of the system. But a few, just a few, will let it take root. And when that happens, everything changes." The fire crackled. "What we're doing here isn't just survival," Caleb said finally. "It's planting something, and we don't know yet who will let it grow." That night, the storm came, first in the form of rain, then in something worse. Zach woke to the sound of screaming. Rushing outside, he saw a small group huddled in the center of the camp, surrounding a man writhing on the ground. His eyes darted wildly, and he muttered incoherent words under his breath. "It's happening again," Jonas said, his face grim. Zach's stomach tightened. They had seen cases like this before. People who had escaped Vesla's neural alignment centers, but were still caught in the system's lingering grip. "He was fine yesterday," one of the medics said. Then, after nightfall, he started glitching, like his thoughts weren't his anymore. Caleb knelt beside the man, speaking softly. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyes flicked toward him, his pupils dilated. "No, there's a pattern. I see it, I hear it, it's rewriting me." Caleb turned to Arav. "Is this some kind of delayed trigger?" Arav's expression was tense, more like a sleeper process. Vesla doesn't just track people, they predict them. If he's experiencing a delayed activation, it means they didn't just program his mind to obey. They programmed him to self-destruct. The crowd tensed. "Can you stop it?" Zach asked. Arav hesitated. "I don't know." Caleb looked back at the man, whose muttering had grown louder. His body convulsed, as if something inside him was trying to break free. "You're not just code," Caleb said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise. "They don't own you. You're more than the machine." The man gasped as if drowning in his own mind. Caleb's voice sharpened. "You hear me? You're not the machine." For a moment, the man went still. Then, slowly, his breathing evened. His gaze met Caleb's, and the wildness faded. He swallowed. "I'm still here." The storm continued into the next day, and the atmosphere in the sanctuary was tense. The previous night's incident left everyone shaken. If Vesla had the ability to trigger breakdowns remotely, were any of them truly safe? Then another problem arrived. A small group of scavengers returned from a supply run in the outskirts of a Vesla-controlled city. One of them, a woman named Sabine, refused to enter the camp. She paced at the perimeter, her face pale, her eyes darting wildly. "I can't," she whispered when Samar approached her. "I hear them. I hear them inside my head." Samar motioned for Caleb. He arrived quickly, his eyes scanning Sabine's trembling form. "Who's inside your head?" Sabine clenched her fists. "I don't know. It's like 100 voices, all at once, static, signals, patterns. It's too much. It's too much." Arav swore under his breath. Vesla's been working on a multi-user AI synchronization project. Theoretically, if they linked someone's neural patterns to the system, they could become an access point for the network itself. Caleb knelt beside her. "Sabine," he said gently, "listen to me. What's real right now?" Sabine gasped, her eyes wild. I don't know." Caleb took her hand, grounding her. "You're here, right now. You're more than their voices." Tears ran down Sabine's face as she squeezed her eyes shut. "I don't want to be part of them anymore." "Then don't be," Caleb whispered. "You're free." Sabine let out a sob, her body shaking as the tension in her frame released. Her breathing steadied. The storm began to break. The next day, as the rain cleared, Amara, Samar, and a few others gathered in Caleb's tent. They had become some of the sanctuary's strongest leaders, not in force, but in resilience. "You've been speaking a lot about what we're building here," Samar said, "but if we're not careful, we'll lose focus. We need to think bigger." Caleb listened. Samar continued, "It's not just about surviving anymore. If we're serious about taking down Vesla, we have to go beyond this place. We need connections, we need networks, and we need people who can carry the truth forward." Caleb nodded. "Then let's start." As the sanctuary mobilized, preparing for its next steps, Caleb felt a strange weight pressing on him. That night, as he stood at the river's edge, Zach joined him. "You look like a man with something on his mind," Zach said. Caleb didn't look away from the water. "Something's coming." Zach frowned. "Vesla." Caleb exhaled. "Not just them." Zach waited, but Caleb said nothing more. The river rushed on, and the sanctuary moved forward, unaware of just how close they were to the storm that would change everything.